Welcome to the Movement Podcast. This show is all about movement, giving you a better idea of how you can optimize the human body to be the best it can be.
So let's talk about ankle mobility, Gray. And if you think about it, most people that come in, or most of you all that are listening, you're not going to the gym thinking about, hey, I've got to improve my ankle mobility. Most people are going to the gym or working out or exercising to lose weight, get stronger, create more power, create more endurance, maybe, run a little bit better if they're training for a triathlon or whatever it is they're doing, achieve their goals. And ankle mobility is not something that they're specifically considering. However, it's going to impact your ability to do all of those things, your ability to, even if you want to lose weight, it's something that you've got to address, because a lack of ankle mobility impacts your balance, impacts your gait, impacts your walking. And shoot, Gray, we've got some data that says ankle mobility and a lack of shoulder mobility are related. Now, I'm not saying one is causing the other, or that's not what our data says, but there's a relationship there. And one of the examples I like to use is, you take a basketball player, Gray, that comes in that typical basketball player wants to improve their power, wants to be able to dunk a basketball. And of course, the traditional thinking for that athlete, and in my world, dealing with a lot of high school athletes, the parent thinking, hey, let's put them on some power training, right? And so what do we do at FMS? We're going to take you through a series of screens and tests. And, one of the tests we would do is we have a power, part of our fundamental capacity screen, we have a power screen, we have a power test. And that is broad jumping, vertical jumping. We do a broad jump, and we compare right versus left, and we see how far you can jump out. And you should be able to jump out 110% of your height with both feet. Now, then we break that down and look at your right versus your left. And we take that same person who we identify as having a lack of, or a 30% deficit on their left single leg jump versus their right single leg jump. So now we're getting somewhere. Then we compare that to our carry screen and other things. We realize that their capacity is down. Again, the traditional thinking is, oh, wow, Lee, you just identified you got a left power problem. Let's work on left power. And what do you see a lot of people then doing? Scouring Instagram, finding out what power exercise is the best one. But we don't do that here at FMS. We take one step behind that, because what we'll do is say, all right, why do you have a left power problem? And then we take you through the functional movement screen, and we have an ankle mobility test in there. And then now we identify you have a lack of ankle mobility. So great. And today what we're going to do is unpack that. How can ankle mobility impact so many other things? And not to mention, the research has been pretty consistent. A lack of ankle mobility is also a risk factor for musculoskeletal health. But I think what I'm going to press you on to, Gray, is how all that interrelates. But maybe we need to think a little bit differently about how we're actually improving ankle mobility.
Well, I'm very glad that you did start with power, because we hear a lot of muscle strengthening, fascial tensegrity, elastic strength, ballistic strength. We hear a lot of these conversations, but if you have a lack of mobility, you can't load those tissues and you can't benefit from those reactions. Tom Myers has dissected out a continuous piece of fascia from your heel bone all the way to the base of your skull. If you don't play that guitar string right, you don't get the full benefit of this dance with gravity. So ankle mobility, if it's a problem, is going to inhibit any pattern starting off that foot. So will it make you be a bad pitcher? Absolutely. Will it hurt your ground stroke in tennis? Yes. Will you maybe not want to shift full weight to that leg in your transition in a golf swing? Of course. And every step of the day, your stride feels equal, and yet it's slightly not. Or each step is creating a different tensegrity, muscle reaction sequence based on this limitation. Now, nobody, as you said, ever comes to us and says, I got bad ankle mobility and I think it's the start of everything. They come and say, I got pain somewhere or I need to perform. The very start of this entire FMS journey was on a plane flight when I'm coming back from evaluating an athlete at a D1 football program with a sports hernia. He was already fast and he was working on power. And then all of a sudden he had a huge pelvic problem and he had surgery to repair it. And then he ripped his abs and his adductors off his pelvis again. And he had a surgery to repair that. So they flew Gray Cook out to sort of be a second opinion between the strength coaches and the athletic trainers and the PTs and the docs on the job. And the first thing I did was just this whole body appraisal, one of those moments that you and I had been doing for a while. Everybody wanted me to look at his hips, his pelvis, and the site of the surgery. And I found that dorsiflexion restriction you just mentioned, not a 30-degree dorsiflexion, 30% different than the other side. That's one of the tangibles we get. It's not just about an arbitrary number. It's, are you using a matched set of ankles, and do those matched set of ankles cover the marks of humanity? And if they cover the marks of humanity and you want to play athletics, do they cover the marks of athleticism? You know what we found out in the NFL Combine? A 3-3 on our FMS lunge, a upright spine, shoulders racked and stacked, full, non-wavering, rock-solid lunge is not just a good thing to have for durability in the NFL. It's a performance thing, meaning when you got a great lunge and great ankle mobility and you can show it on either side, you can get your center of mass lower, you can get your base of support wider, and you can decelerate and direction change. And that's got a lot to do with that sport, and it's got a lot to do with field and court sports. But the first order of business is, do you have an ankle mobility problem? What I find is the knee-jerk reaction on the internet is, what do I do for it? Well, it depends. It depends on whether you've got an ankle alignment issue or if you've got an inappropriate tone issue. And most people think, well, my calf's just too tight. But nobody ever thinks maybe my dorsiflexors are just too weak. So I said a lot there, but our journey started with, if you're upright on your feet and consider yourself functional and have stiff ankles, we got 3 patterns that say you're not. And it's not bad. That's the forecast. You can do anything about that forecast you want. A risk factor is nothing but a forecast. It's going to rain on Thursday. Pack a raincoat or not. I don't care. I already told you which way it's going. So number one is know how to be aware you got an ankle mobility problem and realize what's good enough for both symmetry and the activity you're going to. Then, can you pass strength test and performance test involving the ankle, like a Y balance test and Lee's test, the standing broad jump we did, we jump off one, land on two. Safety's already built in there. But what we're really looking is what puts you through the air. And if you've got an ankle mobility problem, you can't load those tissues. We expect lower power. And if you do have good ankle mobility and you don't know what to do with those tissues, now we know how to train them. But if you don't have ankle mobility, you don't even have the proprioceptive alignment.
Right. I was getting ready to say, Gray, you said a lot about tone and tension, and you get into muscle integrity, all those fancy things. And it really comes down to, if you don't have good mobility, that's not giving proper feedback to the brain to tell the muscles what to do. You're lacking a little bit of input. And that's where we always say you need to have good mobility. We want you to have good mobility, as you said, minimum amount, at least reach the minimum amount so that the joint can give good feedback and good information so that you have good alignment and all that. And that's proprioceptive input. That's motor control. That's stability, all those things we always talk about. But we start talking about the ankle and the foot, and we did a whole podcast on the foot. I think it was last season, but we're talking about the ankle. It does start at the ground and how you react. But if you've got a lack of ankle mobility, it impacts your throwing, your balance, all this other stuff. But then a lot of people may not complain. It's not one of the major, injuries or painful areas in the body. Where do most injuries occur in the body? Backs, you say spine, low back, shoulders, and knees.
Yes.
And if we start thinking about what is a lack of ankle mobility, why does that put more stress on the knee? Because you never hear people talk about, my ankles are injured or hurt. They talk about, I sprain my ankles a lot.
What's the number one injury in high school?
Yeah, ankle sprains.
Ankle sprains. The most catastrophic injury in high school is usually an ACL or some type of back fracture, right?
That's right.
Yeah. But the ones that, they happen so much, nobody cares anymore. But the whole point is, what's the rehab protocol for a grade 2 ankle sprain at the high school level, with or without an athletic trainer? If I don't hurt, I'm playing. Coach said I can.
Yeah, and then they go through and they tape the ankle.
Yeah.
In order to get on the field So in essence, they're now locking up the ankle, putting more stress on the knee. And if we think about the joints around the biggest areas of concern, the knee, the back, and the shoulders. Well, now you got the ankle, the hips, and the upper back and T-spine.
Right.
And if you follow or read much about anything these days, all you hear about is, well, we got to get the hips moving. We got to get the ankles moving. We got to get the T-spine moving. It's all connected. And that kind of leads me to the conversation about this idea of regional interdependence.
Okay.
Is what you and I have been describing when we talk about movement. That's really what we're talking about. Everything is connected. I mentioned it in my little first kind of start, my little monologue to kick this thing off is we got data that says you got a lack of ankle mobility, good chance you got a lack of upper body mobility, and that's our shoulder mobility test. So we can't just think about this myopic, I got to create good ankle mobility. We got to create good ankle mobility and set the stage so all the other joints are working well together. And this idea of regional interdependence is not new.
No,
it's not something that's been around a while.
We got 2 new courses I think you'll like. One's a deep dive on mobility and one's a deep dive on stability. We really unpack that and show you how simple single corrective exercises aren't nearly as good as a meal of mobility assembled in a flow, in a set of stations. Do the same thing for stability. It's sort of a new way of looking at things, but it's that same old functional approach, just with nice packages that actually give you huge dividends.
If you're rehabbing with unknown problems, they burden the rehabilitation. If you're trying to get your back out of pain and have stiff hips and ankles, it's going to be a different journey for you than somebody who's also got back pain and doesn't have those issues. And we need to start taking those into account because what do we know? If I get you out of back pain, right, and I get somebody else out of back pain, and you both leave my clinic, one of you doesn't have the other risk factors like poor balance on one leg, lack of ankle mobility, a lack of a deep squat and a toe touch, or a huge asymmetry, you're coming back and they're not, meaning it's going to come again because I got you out of the episode. I didn't change your forecast. I didn't change your risk factors. So risk factors, once you're out of rehab, put a burden on the way you grow and adapt and develop and train. But risk factors while you're rehabbing make you think, am I not pushing hard enough? And most people push too hard on the wrong thing. They don't realize this person has far more burdens on them while they're rehabbing.
Well, and that's why it's difficult for you and I to make a recommendation on the quote unquote best exercise for someone's back. You know, we get pigeonholed. Hey, you know, what's the best core exercise? Or you go onto YouTube and the most popular YouTube hits out there, somebody saying, hey, here's the back protocol, or here's how you fix someone's back if they're in pain. Well, someone may have a great response to that if that's their only problem.
Right.
If they've got these other issues stacked on top, maybe they're not sleeping great, maybe they've got a lack of ankle mobility. Because as soon as their back is hurting, maybe because they've got a lack of ankle mobility. Right. And you're only addressing the back problem and not addressing the underlying cause of the problem. So get back to that idea of regional interdependence.
Okay. 2 ways this can happen. The ankle can be the driver of that shoulder behavior you were talking about, or it can be the aggregate. Okay. Now, regional interdependence means I'm not complaining about my ankle. I'm complaining about my back. But if you're prudent in your rehabilitation and assessment of the situation, I'm trying to get a normal back in the presence of an abnormal ankle. The ankle doesn't hurt, the back does. So all our attention used to go to the back. Now, if we're responsible in this, and we learn this through athletics, because if we don't get an athlete's movement screen back to an acceptable level, they just keep getting injured, sometimes in a different place, right? A lack of ankle mobility can give you shin splints or low back pain. And depending on how you compensate with your knee and your back for that lack of range of motion and that lack of posterior chain tensegrity and that lack of co-contraction between your dorsiflexors and plantar flexors, I don't know how many ripples are going to happen in the pond when I throw the rock in there. I just know it's not going to be still anymore. And so I think a lot of people chase that pain. We all do it. And because we're empathetic, and that's what you keep screaming about. But those of us who step back from the situation realize these ankles are stiff because they're using them that way, or they're having to do this because their ankles are stiff.
And you said something, the word compensation that you and I have been screaming about for 25 years. And I've gotten feedback from other people that say, well, Lee, the body's supposed to compensate. Yes, it's supposed to compensate. It has to compensate in order to accomplish a task. That doesn't mean it's okay. That's just what the body does in the presence of what? Pain or a lack of mobility or stability.
Yeah. I'm going to blow your mind because I thought
probably you're not going to blow my mind, but you may try.
It's okay. Hard. It's not hard. I've seen it happen a few times.
Usually it's after a few drinks.
Okay. Check this out. This is a thought experiment. If you're born deaf, you have to learn to read lips. But if you go deaf slowly over 10 years, you learn to read lips. A lot of people don't know you have a hearing loss, and yet you've accommodated and you're visually more patterning the way they're moving their mouth and using their gestures to formulate language. So you could have a 30% hearing loss and not know it because you compensate good as a lip reader. But the quicker we catch that, right? The quicker we can do something about it. Because if you can't hear me with your eyes closed, then, and that's what we're trying to say when we work back through it. Because I think Kelly and Juliet Starrett just wrote a book, Built to Move. They are sensitive to the ankle mobility issue, right? They know standing desks aren't alone. We've got to do something to get that mobility back. The knee over toes guy, Ben Patrick, came to the realization that his knee pain in basketball had a lot to do with him playing a sport that didn't demand a lot of dorsiflexion range of motion, but it sure does suffer when it doesn't have it, right? You can get through a basketball game with stiff ankles, but stuff's going to happen that shouldn't.
Right, but that's, again, going back to compensation. Your analogy with over time, and I think that's where you get this micro trauma, and that's why the knees, shoulders, and backs are the biggest areas of problems.
It is. But the other thing is, people think if they just do prophylactic ankle exercises, they will be vaccinated.
Hold on. Why is that? That's what I'm trying to get you to get into is, why is the knee and the back and the shoulder the biggest problems? Because you got a lack of ankle mobility or hip mobility or T-spine mobility.
Well, this was a thing that Mike Boyle and I tried to formulate, and it became known on the internet as the joint by joint approach. And it sort of came from me exploring Vladimir Janda. So I'm going to take a tangent. I'll be right back. I know that annoys you. But Vladimir Janda had this concept of a lower and upper crossed syndrome, the way you would disorganize your neck, head, shoulders, and torso, or your pelvis, hips, and low back to a sedentary or overtrained situation. The funny thing is, the default of bad movement screens is usually too much or not enough activity. We don't see great movement screens, after we've been beaten up on you in athletics in the military, and we don't see great movement screens on people who sit too much. Okay.
Yeah, some of the best movement screens are people who are just, they're pretty active. They walk every day. They're just kind of, they feel pretty good about themselves. Those are the best movement screeners. The NFL Combine guys are not.
Yeah, no. I think Michael Easter exposed through a conversation with the Go Ruck crowd, what kind of body do I get when I ruck? Pretty much super medium. Super medium's a good movement screen that I can do anything.
I'll take that all day.
Yeah. Well, super medium can adapt in any direction. A fixed, over-specialized bodybuilder going to have a hard time doing a ballistic sport. They've been training to pose, not bounce and move. So you don't see bodybuilders in parkour. You don't see parkour guys posing too much. But
all right, let me take you back to your tangent. Vladimir Janda and the upper and lower cross syndrome.
He noticed these tendencies. And I'll give you the example in the lower body. Your hip flexors become your abs, right? And your low back becomes your glutes. You start extending your low back instead of finishing your hip extension. And you start planking with your hip flexor instead of your frickin' core. And he noticed this when we get disorganized. Once again, sit too much or get myopic in our training or overtrain. Now, Vladimir Janda also looked at the body in layers or regions. And that really got me thinking. And so one of those thoughts happened to spill out on a bar when me and Mike Boyle are about 3 beers into a conversation. And he said, just spell it out. How do you see the body? And I said, well, if I come at it at layers, and the way I phrased it that day was, if I could give your foot a gift, it would be stability, because it's inherently structured to be mobile. Your foot looks like your hand flattened down. So there's a lot of mobility built in there, a lot of sensation built in there. But if you don't have control of that, you can't feel what that adaptable arch is getting ready to tell you. Likewise, the ankle is inherently stable, but must maintain mobility within its safe ranges. But the ankle is a much more stable structure. We get up to the knee, it's only a hinge joint, but it pivots, so it's a 3D joint. Your knee is built to be mobile, but man, when it's not stable, there are problems. You dislocate a patella, you hyperextend your knee, you blow a meniscus, you'll shred a ligament. Let's get up to the hip. That's a true ball and socket joint. Your shoulder ain't. Your shoulder's a ball and saucer. It's a little bit different. But your hip is an inherently integrally structured joint. It must maintain its mobility to function. Now we flip up through the pelvic floor and back. That right there should be stable through muscular alignment, but it's designed to be mobile so you are adaptable. You can function getting up off the floor. A back getting up off the floor doesn't look like a deadlifting back, right? A quadruped animal doesn't use lordosis.
Yeah, let me pause right there, Greg, because I think that's a big misconception.
Okay.
Is that I think somewhere along the line that people assume the back shouldn't move. And the back was built to move. Now, there's certain situations where if you're lifting heavy or you're under load, you got to create a stiff back in order for you to not injure the back. But tell me how you're going to get in and out of the car or up and down off the floor without your back moving. It ain't going to happen.
Well, and we learn that from the developmental progression, because a baby simply gains the pattern for gait through going through rolling, crawling, kneeling, striding, stepping, squatting. And so a baby with a mobile spine learns how to organize it for gait. But at any time, if that baby can't walk, it didn't lose the ability to crawl, half kneel, roll, or anything like that. Now, when we get fixed into an upright posture and can't explore those lower postures, the mobile spine, right? Then we're going to lose something. But we're going to lose it slow, almost in an imperceptible way, just like going deaf and learning to read lips. But there's a lot of people who are walking around that don't have good balance. The fact that they're walking is a great compensation, but if we test their balance, we're blown away. The two things we say is, if we test your balance and you have bad ankles, you're a good compensator. If we test your balance and you have good ankles, it's somewhere else. We don't have to bottleneck at the ankle. So we know we can go right to core stability or some other factor. But stiff ankles make the foot pronate and the knee rotate in unnatural positions. So we see stiff ankles associated with plantar fasciitis and foot problems like bunions. And we also see stiff ankles in people who seem to injure their knees frequently. And so the joint by joint conversation that Mike and I were having is, let's not talk about a joint in isolation. Let's talk about joints in relationship. And when we see bad patterns, we see bad relationships. And if we don't unpack those, we're part of the problem.
All right, so Greg, that's a lot right there. So let's take a quick break and we come back. Let's talk about more specifically, why does the ankle get stiff? And then what can we do about it? All right, so we talk about these big buckets, talked about compensations. But Gray, let's kind of unpack that a little bit. So why does the ankle get stiff? Why does it have a tendency to get tight?
It's being asked to do something. It's the one being asked to compensate, or it's the one compensating. I usually find the ankles that are the problem have been abused for some time. They're runners, they're basketball players. They're ankles that have been pounded into the ground. Probably
previous injuries?
Yes, previous injuries, unresolved injuries, or compensated injuries. But the tissue actually gets stiff. And we know it takes fascia a little bit of time to change. And just so our listeners are aware, about 20% of a muscle's fibers feed back into the body sock, not necessarily the tendon proper. So,
right, hold on, body sock.
Yep, you got all that fascia is literally connected to contractile elements, and it sort of weaves the muscles together just like the neurological system does. And so when the neurological system has been running a tight ankle for a long time, the tissues adapt and they're pretty tight. And you don't stretch that overnight. And if you do, that's called a tear, not elongation. However, if I got a hip that doesn't extend very well, and I got a tight psoas and a weak core, and I walk with a limited amount of hip extension, then I have early toe off every day, 7,000 steps a day. So your calf automatically says, oh, we're running a short stride here. Yeah. I guess I can just tighten up and lose some dorsiflexion because the body is not going to maintain a motion that you don't need or use. So you can literally get really tight ankles that, they'll lengthen right back out. I can stretch that ankle out, and get you into a deep squat. You just don't hold it because you walk with a lack of hip extension. So the ankle here is receiving a shortening signal, but it'll easily open right back up. You got another problem that's causing ankle tightness, whereas when that ankle tissue has been injured, abused, or overtrained in a myopic pattern, it ain't gonna change overnight. But we built in indicators in all our systems so we know, hey, is this a tissue or tone problem? Quick change, that's a tone problem. Look somewhere else for a driver. Slow change, that could be the driver. Make sure everything else is
Which is why we keep saying the same thing, Gray, for 25 years, is look at movement first. Look at the entire body, how the entire body goes through different postures and positions to identifying the driver. Is it a mobility or a stability problem? Because that's going to direct how we go about fixing or quote unquote treating the problem if we can identify that. But if we don't, and we just go at it as, my ankles are stiff. I hear that all the time. Yeah, my ankles are stiff. I sprained my ankle 5 years ago. My ankles are stiff. They're not going to get unstiff. Well, we can get them to not be stiff. The problem is too often we focus on the ankle and don't try to integrate it into some other global pattern or movement.
If you don't live within patterns that need ankle mobility, you won't keep it. So we know for a fact when we first brought the movement screen to the NBA, they said that we can delete a few of these movement patterns because we ain't got a deep squat in this sport. I'm like, no, you just got a deep squat to be human. It's a good indicator of a healthy back, a strong pelvic floor, good ankle, knee, and hip mobility. And if deep squatting hurts, I don't necessarily assume you got a lack of mobility. I assume you could potentially have a medical problem. We will find mobility and stability issues within that pain, but unpacking that situation is totally different. So when I'm looking at a few indicators of could I have a bad ankle in this situation, I could say the squat, hurdle, step, and lunge in the movement screen. In the SFMA, our medical clearing screen, I could say the deep squat and toe touch. If either one of those are limited, an ankle could be driving it. And let's just talk about two major things that change the behavior of the ankle. You can have a soleus that's very irritable and won't let you deep squat. But if you think about a the gastrocnemius, it crosses the knee joint. So when your knee is straight, your gastroc is the one that's got all the tension. And when your knee is bent, your soleus is the one that has all the tension. We don't usually see a disconnect there, but sometimes we do. So we do have people that can rock bottom a deep squat, can't touch their toes. Or they can touch their toes, but they can't deep squat. Both are ankle behaviors. If you think about it, the best toe touchers actually toe touch in plantar flexion. The best deep squatters accept dorsiflexion. But there's a co-contraction stability that can easily give you a mobility problem. And what I mean is if you don't have really good dorsiflexors, you will stay obligated stiff in your plantar flexors. Just like if you don't have good abs, you will hold your back upright because you know you don't have a co-contraction to bend forward. So one of the things I think the knee over toes guy, Ben Patrick, does real well is he spotlights the dorsiflexors. What have you and I always done in the exam room? I want to see a plantar flexion rep out and a dorsiflexion rep out. We can do both those with you standing against the wall for balance, going up on your toes or lifting your toes. And if you fatigue in 5 on one side and 26 on the other, I'm not necessarily thinking you got a weakness. I'm thinking, well, I could stretch them out and see if they get stronger because I could balance the system. I could tape their ankle and line their joint up and make them a little bit stronger, or I could break a trigger point on that tight side and see the other side get stronger. Either way, anything that brings that strength back without a workout was probably tone or tissue or bad balance. And if you're just weak, 2 weeks, you won't be. That's easy. The exercise is easy. How quick you respond to it almost tells me the next thing to do.
Meet Symmio, a new way to improve your health and wellness and live a happier, healthier life. Symmio will take you through a step-by-step assessment that looks at the way you move, how you feel, and identifies lifestyle factors that contribute to your overall health and wellness. Symmio will help you understand your greatest opportunities to improve and identify any potential risk factors you may have. Once completed, you will receive a detailed wellness report and gain access to your Symmio dashboard. In there, you will find daily corrective exercises and lifestyle content designed to tackle your areas of focus and support you on your wellness journey. Ready to live a happier and healthier life? Take the first step and sign up for Symmio today. The exercise is easy once you've identified the problem. So you said a couple things there. So if you're just an individual listening to us at home and you're not a professional, how do you check ankle mobility? And you said deep squatting. Literally keep your heels on the floor. I mean, we've got something in our self-testing screens that you can put your feet together, hands out front. Can you break parallel with your knees? Yeah. That's going to check. Because again, we don't necessarily want to isolate out ankle mobility without first checking a pattern. Because if you've got a deep squat pattern, I'm not worried about ankle mobility, right?
Right.
If you don't have a deep squat pattern, well, then I do need to take another step because a deep squat pattern, it could be a hip mobility problem. It could be a knee mobility problem. It could be an upper back mobility. It could be a core problem. There's a lot of things wrong or could be the problem. We just want to rule things out. And that's what a screen will do.
And there's one other problem too. We've noticed that we see people on the movement screen that have a great lunge on one side and a poor one on the other. But when you squat, you use both hips in the same way, but you will only go as low as the worst one. So when we see an asymmetry can give you a bad squat and a bad toe touch, and a limitation anywhere in that stacking of joints can give you that. So we must unpack mobility first. And when we do find a mobility problem, I can tell you it will take one of two courses. It'll change almost miraculously if you do the right corrective strategy, or what I call the tension or tone dump. Or it'll correct slowly. Why assume one has to be right? If it's tone, I expect it to let go quickly. And so that's why I think me in my career at this point put that mobility flow, that ankles thing up on YouTube, because that right there doesn't just target ankle mobility, but man, does it bias it. So it says, can you use your ankles with your hip like this? Can you use your ankle, knee, and hip like this? Can you use your ankle symmetrically, asymmetrically? Can you use your ankle and make sure it doesn't affect the T-spine? So we have reaches, strides, balancing opportunities, and tension dump opportunities. And when we slam all that together, that's not an ankle corrective. That's a lower body nutrient. And sometimes I think we got to get off supplements and eat whole food. And sometimes I think we got to get off exercises and get into a calibration activity. And I'll be honest with you, when I have an active day planned, I don't need to hit the gym and I don't need to exercise, but I do like a priming movement. So there's a way I do kettlebell swings or Indian clubs or a half foam roll flow that calibrates me for the day. And if it ain't going good, I take a second sip. And if it's going great, I'm like, I'm lined up, and I go. And the older I get, the more I use exercises to calibrate me, not to train me, because my activities get me my step rate.
Yeah. So really what I'm hearing you say is there's nothing wrong with how I would argue most people treat ankle mobility right now. And that's, doing some foam rolling on the gastrocsoleus and back of their calves and rolling it out. Then they get in half kneeling, they're doing some type of ankle mobility. The problem comes in putting that into an entire flow or pattern, because you got to connect the dots. If I've got a lack of ankle mobility, then I've been walking around compensating for potentially years. And now you've opened up the joint by laying on the half roll or foam roll and doing something. Now I've given myself ankle mobility. Well, until you connect the dots, as you just kind of laid out in the Gray Cook way of how's the ankle, knee, and hip all reacting, until you do that, until you connect the brain and that joint you just now opened up with all the other joints in between, you haven't hit save on that document.
I agree. And a quick shout out to the strength coaches out there. John Tureen and I confronted this early in the days of the movement screen in the Indianapolis Colts. And we had justification. We had good reason to take a lot of people off back squats because squats weren't that good as far as the movement screen said. We didn't really go on this ankle vaccination thing. We just said, hey, let's keep training the squat, but just not loading the squat. And so I think, and John will have to correct me, I think it was 4 or 5 weeks, we didn't go heavy in the squat, and the knee-jerk reaction of a lot of the line coaches is these guys are going to get weaker. Well, John said, we're going to keep an eye on things, but we're not going heavy. We're going to reclaim squatting pattern. I think that's what Squat University does real good. They reclaim the pattern and then they strengthen it, as you said, through repetition and variety, right? But they reclaim the pattern first. They clean the ears and then they play the music. They adjust the eyes and then they view the thing. So I think what we learned from that is when we went back, we had a lot of ankle, groin, hip, low back mobility flows, if you will. We were using a Reebok core board. We brought in some wrestling mats. We just let these guys get down on the ground and just re-explore the depth of their position. I see a lot of exercise, a lot of correctives for squat looking that way now. Here's the moral of the story. When we went back and revisited back squatting strength without working on it for 5 weeks in an NFL weight room with everything at risk, deep squat strength or back squat strength stayed the same or went up without strengthening it. And that has been our inherent message. Go back and reclaim movement. You will find you're not as weak or as stiff as you thought you were. But when you try to sniper your flexibility or sniper your core, I hate to say this, but leave that to me, because the 80-20 play is reclaim the movement. There are 1,000 different ways. There's some good shit out there. Do that. When you can't find it, I'll be your sniper. But the whole point is, I don't want to be a sniper if you could have cleaned it up before there.
Well, identify that there's a problem. Do the kind of global approach, like reclaim the squat or the lunge, the things that use it, making sure the ankle, hip, and knee all react the same way. You got some ankle mobility flows on YouTube, and we've got some stuff. We got some more isolated stretches that you can find on our exercise library on our website. But that's the key: is really first make sure there's a problem and go back and see if it works. That's the other thing, is get the feedback you need. That's the other thing we keep saying is, I've identified there's an issue through my deep squat self-test, through a half kneeling dorsiflex, whatever. There's plenty of ways to check that. You said the toe touch is another way. Go back and recheck it. And I think that's a mistake a lot of us make. We don't go back and recheck on how that works. But if you do go a little deep and you're checking ankle mobility, another common problem people have is they may get a little pinch up front. Little pain.
Right.
So, and now that may be a little something different that you got to deal with. And that's not an uncommon, especially if you're an active individual and you've had a previous ankle injuries, or you're a runner or basketball, whatever it is. You get in half kneeling, or you go down and squat, or one of the patterns, put your feet together, hands out front, try to squat down, and you get a little pinch up front. That might be a little something different you need to do.
I'm so glad you brought that up.
I know you are.
I'm so glad you brought the ball down the court, Lee. I had a dunk.
Listen, I got to I'm the one passing the lob of the basketball. You just got to slam it now.
All right. Well, I am glad you said that, because when you and I, in our early days of teaching, had a room full of people and we got down into a dorsiflexion expression test, right? Half kneeling, whatever we're doing. We say, who feels tightness? What we didn't qualify is how many people feel it up front and how many people feel it in back, because that is a semantic problem. If you feel ankle tightness up front expressing your dorsiflexion, that's called impingement. And if you feel it in back, that's called tension. And depending on the level of maybe personal trainer or person we're working at the time, if they don't have the anatomy background, tight is tight. I can't get it there and something's stopping me. But that's a completely different thing. So when I hear up front, I think ankle alignment. And the best exploration I've ever seen of this is the elegant Brian Mulligan mobilizations for the ankle. It's pretty much 4 passes at orienting the malleoli forward, backward, tib, fib, and you get a slot where that impingement goes away. That means that joint doesn't know how to align itself, or you may have too much tone on one side, or you just don't have a good foot position. There's a lot of reasons you could get it. But you and I used to just tape them right out of that position. Now all of a sudden, where's it tight? Oh, it's on the back. So what do? We grab a roller stick or a foam roll or some spray and stretch, hit that calf, and we just told the body, you don't have to have a parking brake anymore. You're not running out of room in the front of the joint, so you can lengthen the tissue on the back of the joint. So if you ask tightness, half the people will put up their hand, but 25% of them are feeling it up front and 25% are feeling it up back. What's your contingency plan? I can handle both, but I didn't know it until I found them both. So
that's right. And I think, taping you up, and I think there's some other things I've seen on social media where they're taking the strap and putting it on the front of the ankle and pulling it back as they go through dorsiflexion. Those are good. But again, set that baseline, figure out, is that the problem? Because as you said, now you've got tone in the calf that you just realized I got some tightness, because that was there as you said, the parking brake, as a protective mechanism. So the one thing I'll stress, and I think you'll back me up here, Gray, is if you don't have that knowledge of that backing and understanding, don't just go at it trying to do a mobilization or self-mobilization unless you know kind of more in depth of why that person may be doing that, because you could potentially create some problems.
Yeah, if you aggressively pursue tone when it doesn't want to let go, there's a reason it doesn't want to let go, and we got to trust the body. So I was very, very hyper vigilant putting together those mobility flows for most people. And once again, you're not doing this in the direction of pain. You're a person who has problems that is going to aggressively reclaim the ankle because you think it might have been doing that. We don't want you to do exercises that ping the pain, but you'd be surprised how much you can do with a bad back or a bad knee if you follow the instructions and get screened first. We know the slot, and that's why, every movement in a movement screen is first and foremost a provocation test. Does it hurt? Because if it does, that's not the direction we're going in. I'm interested in all the baggage you're carrying while you're asking me to fix that thing. And if I can take a few bags off, this is different. And if I can take a few more off, this is different. It may or may not solve the problem, but it sets up a much better situation for recovery. So I do appreciate those people on the internet that even though pain brought you to my website, I'm going to responsibly show you how to exercise within the confines, because you bang away at pain, it's going to bite you back. It's going to bite you back. And that's why we've always said that's not necessary. There's so many other places you could work on yourself with movement other than going right into that pain provocation.
And I think that what I would argue conservative approach is a much more responsible long-term success. And I think in the world of sports medicine, we may have to take the aggressive approach. I can tell you right now, I've taped up kids' ankles or athletes' ankles and stuck them on the field when they weren't close to 100%. But that's just what you got to do. But if we're going to really think more long-term, creating durability, this is the type of approach that we all need to be thinking about, is remove the underlying issues. Think about the global approach and getting the body to just simply move better.
Well, I watched your evolution as an athletic trainer. You went from ankle sprain management to ankle mobility reclamation. You did.
Oh, my good Lord.
No, well, here's why. The guy wasn't done until he got his squat back. Whereas before, as long as he wasn't complaining, but how could he complain when you had an ankle tape job on him that didn't let him dorsiflex in the first place? So I watched you go from Johnson & Johnson ankle tape to, all right, on game day, whatever it takes to make it to the end of the game. But Monday morning, you didn't tape up an already stiff ankle so it felt secure and comfortable. You explored range of motion and taped him. I'm going to use a big word, arthrokinematic. You realigned his joint with some Luca tape. You didn't protect the problem, because a lot of kids get taped on that first game And it doesn't come off till the end of the season. And that's a lot of unnecessary stress on the knee.
Quote unquote prophylactic taping really does not have a place, in my opinion. And my evolution, as you said, was going from taping up an ankle to where I was even an acute ankle sprain. I was not even taping that ankle. I was using arthrokinematics and realigning, and the feedback the athlete had was night and day. Because again, the athlete just assumed, okay, you're supposed to slap a bunch of white tape on my ankle and lock the ankle up so it doesn't hurt, as opposed to really them looking at me like I was crazy when I slapped 2 strips of tape on them, and they're thinking they're supposed to play a game. But as soon as they stood up and started moving around, they felt so much better. That feedback they were getting was so much better. So it's definitely,
it's not either or. What you did on game day, what is done to injuries in play is we keep a bad situation from getting worse.
Yeah.
We know you're going back in. We know you're not hurt that bad, but we can't have this get any worse because this is already a crack in your armor. You have a vulnerability. We're going to protect you. But Monday morning, we start correcting the problem. And that's where I think we've all dropped the ball. We covered the problem up. They're not complaining, but just because they don't have symptoms doesn't mean they don't have a bad forecast, and it doesn't mean they don't have risk factors. And that's the wall we got to sit on.
And I think taking it back to our original part of this conversation, that scenario, Gray, is what sets up the person who sprains their ankle when they're 17 years old in a football game or basketball game, to having stiff ankles when they're 30, trying to still play basketball and whatnot, and then creating a back problem. Yep. And it's that compensation and that whole scenario, going back to regional interdependence and everything we've been talking about. So, as simple as our approach is, take a look at global movement patterns. And if they're a problem, fix the global movement patterns. All the mess underneath that problem will typically be taken care of. It's your 80-20 rule.
Yep. The message I want to remind us all about in musculoskeletal medicine is a simple mantra that I think our patients and athletes can get. It's like, don't cut what you can unknot or untie. And don't let get knotted what doesn't need to be knotted or tied up in the first place. So there's an ounce of prevention, but once you've got the problem, a lot of people...
You got to say that again because you stumbled through that. I'm going to give you another shot at that.
Don't cut what you can untie. And don't get tied up what never had to be tied up in the first place. Meaning, I don't think that just doing a bunch of correctives preseason is the best thing. I think restructuring a program with functional exercise, full expressions of hip and ankle mobility and core stability and symmetry and balance, that is a fundamental part of a program that keeps you from needing correctives or surgery or rehab. And so I don't just think that we take all the things that are good for ankles to correct them and make that part of your program too. There won't be enough time.
Yeah,
lift correctly and you won't lose ankle mobility.
Our life and our lifestyles and behaviors do enough of tying our bodies up. Don't make it worse when we're training. I think that's probably the thing, because we're going to do enough of bad things on our own. But when you step into the world of fitness, or you're going to go out for a walk, you're just going to do something. Do that with purpose, and don't let that tie you up. So I think that's really, going back to looking at ankle mobility. Ankle mobility is just a driver. It's just one part, but everything's connected.
And if it's not a major problem, we've talked to many people who just institute almost doubling your walking time, and that takes care of a lot of ankle mobility right there. So I think those of us in the movement arts and sciences and services always want to lead with a corrective. Sometimes lead with a generality. Lead with hey, if you were more active on your feet, your ankles would probably respond in kind. And if they don't, I got something you can add.
So we unpacked a lot today, Gray. So any final thoughts on some of these solutions we kind of kicked around?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think most of us go right to the solution, but Simon Sinek reminds us, start with why. I think how to get your ankles more mobile and some of the things of what you could do are out there. They're as quick as 2 clicks on YouTube, but understanding why the ankle's behaving that way. And if you can't answer this question, is the ankle being made to behave inappropriately, or is it inappropriate, right? And And so unpacking that has been our journey. And so when we come at an exercise, we could see one person with an ankle mobility problem and put them on this path, another person that measures the same way, but they get on another path. And it's because we know why the ankle is stiff, not just, hey, I like these, they worked for me. Because that's what we usually see. People, stiff ankle, here's your program. And what I like to say is stiff ankle, this is why, let's see what happens. And that has kept me, I think, out of my own way or confirmation bias, being able to embrace, just because, somebody's got an exercise that didn't come out of FMS camp doesn't mean it won't change the screen. Therefore, you are family. You got something that works and didn't send somebody backward. So, why that ankle is stiff, I think, is the beginning of the journey, not what are my options.
Right. That goes back to what we've been saying for 25 years, screen, test, and assess, figure out, confirm there is a problem. What the problem is. Is it a mobility, stability problem? Is it the ankle? Is it the hip? Wherever it is. And then now you have a better way to see if your solution works. And that comes through feedback and rechecking. And we placed a lot of references and information in this show that you can reference and check out. If you want to learn more about today's podcast or dive deeper into functional movement systems information, check out some of the resources and offers we're providing in the description. That will do it for this episode of the Movement Podcast.
Thanks for listening. And if you liked what you heard, please take a minute and subscribe and review.
If you want to learn more about our system and take the next step in your own movement journey,
visit us at movementpod.com.
Until next time, be sure to first move well,
then move often.